or some other derivatives bet, they would go bad, and they'd all pay themselves, and they'd get great bonuses. And then to get that garbage off their books of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan or Credit Suisse or BNP Bank, the central banks would take it from them and swap it for fresh treasury bills. And the idea was that eventually this wouldn't work anymore. We'd have to bail out the central banks themselves, and we'd create a global lending facility, $100 trillion lending facility. Maybe we'll do an IMF special drawing right. We'll just float this, we'll extend and pretend. But now, there's a war going on. So that strategy was short-sighted because it would only work if there was total globalization and total dollarization. But now that we're in deglobalization and de-dollarization, that end game of floating all the bad central bank debt to a mega central bank. I mean, they will try it with central bank digital currencies, and there's another chapter to come here. But the Bank of England clearly, after 300 years, does now have to declare bankruptcy, as we knew that it would, because the economy was just skating on fumes and hamster poop that they kept in the basement at a chateau somewhere in Switzerland and claimed that had collateral value. Well, guess what? It doesn't. From whence they came. And ironically and hysterically and quite comically, Northern Ireland will be spared because they're part of, wait for it, the EU. So the Brexit, as again I predicted, would lead to total economic calamity. And I didn't, however, think it would result in total plunging into darkness. The only thing you'll hear from the island of Great Britain will be Nigel Farage hawking his new designer gin. Everything else would be dead silent. He had a really good run, many, many hundreds of years. So you have Westminster, or the political class with Parliament, and you have the monarchy over there at Buckingham Palace. And both of these institutions, you have the monarchy, of course, during the period when Diana met her untimely death, was a kind of the beginning of a tabloidization of that institution, and made it into, as some people will tell me, look, the Queen is our Mickey Mouse, or the King is our Mickey Mouse. They're just tourist attractions. They're not to be taken seriously in any way. So there's no institutional integrity there. Now Westminster and the Bank of England are going to fall because they've been resting on their laurels for hundreds of years. If you live there, and this is the thing about it, is that they put up a good front. You go there, and there's the Big Ben, and it's sounding dong, dong, and there's the Thames, and there's Parliament, and you're like, wow, this is solid. This is institutionally solid. But then when you go behind the wall into these organizations, you find that spies are losing the codes to secret codes all the time. They're selling, in the case of the Steele dossier, you've got spies inside MI6 selling state secrets for a gin and tonic down at the Groucho Club. So it's just like becoming a completely dysfunctional mess. And the time from that it would just collapse utterly. It was hard to predict the exact day. It seemed like it was happening imminently, and now it's gone.
The U.S. Treasury intends to create a new position of chief sanctions economist, according to the Financial Times. And if you think about that, they're abandoning ship. They're abandoning the empire because the empire is based on controlling not only the seas and the biggest military might, but of course, all of that depends on controlling the roads of commerce. And the roads of commerce happen digitally. They happen via the SWIFT. They happen via the New York Fed, the U.S. Treasury market. So if they're blowing up, they're making non-fungible their own currency, their own money. Well, it's no longer money. It's just currency that the king can decide at will to block that person and block that person. And just as we predicted back in, I think it was 2010 or 2011, when under the Obama administration, they pulled, for the first time, they weaponized SWIFT. Remember, we were talking to Jim Rickards about that, and they pulled Iran off the SWIFT system. And he said at the time, okay, cool, you won this battle, but remember, there's a long war ahead of you, because once you do this once, it's easier to do it a second time and a third time and a fourth time. But everybody else in the world, other nations, of course, naturally have to think of their own populations and their own survival. They don't want to go down with the ship. They see the captain diving overboard. If you see the captain abandoning ship and you're a passenger, you're going to think twice about staying on. Do I stay on? Is it safe here? No, the captain just jumped overboard. He's rowing away super fast. That's time to quit too.
Right. Well, this is the problem of having a monarchy and an aristocracy in place, is that when times get tough, as they're getting now, the monarchs and the aristocrats are going to jump ship. Right. This is a rearguard action. This is the chief sanctions officer is trying to burn the bridges as they're running away, essentially. And this is what the aristocracy and the monarchy plan to do in Britain and what's left of the aristocrat in continental Europe as well. We don't have an aristocratic class in the United States. We have an oligarchy class, and they'll be on their 300-foot yachts over there in Bimini or somewhere sipping Mai Tais with Jeff Bezos. But in Europe, it's a long-established tradition to simply, get your gold on the horses and start running away.
Yes, you're going to see that. That's what's happening there. In my opinion, that's what we see. If the U.S. Treasury is the one, they're the ones blowing up their role as the settlements.
I'll tell you what, is dirt cheap right now in England are these old castles. Mm-hmm. You can probably buy them for 5 cents on the dollar, but they're about to become very valuable real estate as the aristocrats and BBC presenters barricade themselves in these old castles with some grenade launchers and old reruns of Jimmy Savile. That's what they'll spend the rest of their life looking at.
Max is still bitter that his family was kicked
They
out.
took my castle away in Ireland.
No,
Caberloch.
it's in Scotland.
Yeah, Caberloch Castle in Scotland, the lowlands. George Galloway promised he'd get it back for me. I'm still waiting, George.
Well, let's move to the next headline here as this disintegration, how it's getting darkest before dawn. We're already in the dawn, Max and I. That's why I have my bright, sunny clothes on. And this is the headline as, of course, this currency that the money, the payment rails, the foundation upon which all of their might is built and power and wealth is energy. You can't have an empire, you can't do commerce, you can't have globalization without a lot of energy. Well, as we see, the institutions, the elite, the people in charge, the monarchs, the oligarchs, they have no plan because, they pulled Russia off the grid, the largest commodities producer in the world, one of the top 3 energy producers in the world, had no plan to replace it. Well, what the empire, the center, said was, our modern Rome, which is DC, said, we'll just use U.S. LNG. Okay, let's do that. Well, apparently there's a bunch of ships there with a whole bunch of LNG, but you have to regasify it. There's no place to do it. So there's a whole bunch of tankers off of Europe with no places
Wait a minute. The LNG, the liquefied natural gas.
So you take gas.
They're in tankers, and they got to turn it back into gaseous, and they have no ability to do that.
Well, there are only a few places to do that. There's something like 6 terminals in which you could do that. You take the gas in Texas or Oklahoma, North Dakota, you liquefy it, you put it into a tanker, and you send it across the seas. Well, they can't use it as liquid. They need to turn it back into gas. So dozens of LNG-laden ships queue off Europe's coast, unable to unload. Dozens of ships carrying liquefied natural gas circling off the coast of Spain, unable to secure slots to unload, have prompted grid operators for the country to warn they may have to suspend loading to deal with this, quote, exceptional situation. The region has had to find alternative supplies to Russia's, including LNG, but the arrival of multiple cargoes of the super chilled fuel has exposed Europe's lack of regasification capacity as plants that convert the seaborne fuel back to gas are operating at maximum limit. So,
right. Well, to your point, that no one has planned for this, even though it was very obvious that the end game was in sight. Nobody actually planned for it, which of course would be evidentially so. You know, it wouldn't be catastrophic if people were planning for it. So how can you have a catastrophic end game without having everybody not plan for it? Am I right? Speaking of the ending, this is the ending of this segment. I'm going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way.
Oh.